Los Angeles, agents showed up at a school saying that they have permission from the parents to detain their children. We're talking about children here. So that's why the response has been so vehement.
Luis Leon, an associate editor and organizer at LaborNotes. He has been writing about the protests that have been going on across the country, protesting ICE raids, and particularly labor's reaction to it, union members, and things like that. So, Luis, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, in particular about your piece that came out on June 10th titled, "Trump has put a target on the SEIU and the labor movement is fighting back." Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. So, you know, we wanted to talk generally about these protests and the reaction to them, and obviously David Huerta, president of the SEIU California, his arrest has been at the center of this, and so can you talk to us about the genesis of these protests? Like, what happened? What was it that brought people out? What was it that brought David Huerta out for these initial protests?
Yeah, so the impetus behind these protests in Los Angeles in particular has been just the racial profiling and unlawful arrest, detention, and deportation of immigrant workers. Legal residents, meaning people with green cards, U.S. citizens, have been ensnared in these deportation raids, not only in Los Angeles, but all across the country. So last Friday, federal immigration officials launched one of the most sweeping and coordinated raids at workplaces in neighborhoods in Los Angeles, arresting somewhere between like 46 and 56 immigrant workers. So David Huerta, the president of SEIU, one of the big SEIU locals in California, made up of many janitors, airport workers, security guards. He was part of this rapid response network, and he responded to one of these raids. And in the process of responding and observing these detentions, he was tackled to the ground and arrested.
And the video is out there for people to see. He's been charged now. He has been released at this point on a $50,000 bond, but he has been charged with felony obstruction of a law enforcement officer or something like that, potentially faces up to 6 years in prison. And the video is out there for people to see. He was standing there peacefully. He was not obstructing anything, and he just basically gets tackled by these masked thugs. And I think that it's important for people to understand how how indiscriminate ICE is being with these raids and with the targeting of people, because that is something that's been, people are obviously opposed to the indiscriminate targeting of undocumented immigrants, even if they are undocumented. If they're not hurting anybody, they're going and they're working, they're active in their communities and things like that. Most people are like, leave those people alone. But even outside of that group, there are people that are being caught up in the dragnet, right?
That's right. I mean, since January, heavily armed federal agents have roamed the country in unmarked cars, wearing a mask and arresting people without warrants, purely on the basis of their complexion. There's no other way that you can carry out a mass deportation mandate unless you're doing racial profiling. Because how else are you going to? There's only so many people, that are so-called the hardened criminals that Donald Trump inflamed the country's racist imagination, thinking that these brown hordes were just committing all these crimes. The reality is that many of these folks are just hardworking Americans, many of them, who are just trying to earn, a decent living. And they've been caught up in this really unprecedented and recent memory, dragnet that is basically based on racial profiling. So White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller didn't think federal agents were arresting people fast enough. They were really annoyed that President Obama's ignominious record of deporting 3 million people was, they were not hitting that benchmark. So to surpass those numbers, Trump's agents have used racial profiling, as I said, to carry out these mass deportations. So the Wall Street Journal published a really eye-opening article about how this, has all come about, like how they are ramping up these raids. And as you've heard, part of what really fed into the resistance that we have seen in Los Angeles has been everyday people literally chasing a car driven by someone who's wearing a mask, who hasn't identified themselves, and trying to stop their family member from being kidnapped. And the word kidnapped, I'm not using it to editorialize. Literally, lawyers that are working on these cases, that's what they're describing these raids as kidnappings, where people can't locate their families. In Los Angeles, agents showed up at a school saying that they have permission from the parents to detain their children. Can you imagine that? Suppose that you are in their shoes and it's your family member that you dropped off at school, and all of a sudden you see their faces on TV that they're being hauled off to some jail. We're talking about children here. So that's why the response has been so vehement in Los Angeles. Los Angeles, for context, is a majority Latino immigrant city, and which has a history of mobilizing for these kinds of, deportation schemes that have happened in previous administrations. So they have the infrastructure to respond. And David Huerta and SEIU in particular in California is a powerhouse, and they've been involved in these kinds of actions to defend immigrant workers. So the other thing to mention too is that Trump is not only targeting green card holders and US citizens, he's also creating new categories of people by virtue of eliminating programs like temporary status protections. So I wrote about workers at an IUE manufacturing facility in Kentucky, where many of these workers, their families voted for Trump. Many of them hail from Cuba. And since 1995, Cubans have been coming to the US under this program legally, and have really transformed Louisville into a thriving city. Many of them have flocked to jobs at Amazon, at UPS, and within a year of being in the country, they can apply for permanent status, and many of them, become US citizens. So for them, it's been a rude awakening, to say the least, to see that family members and loved ones have been stripped of their status and basically rendered deportable because they're now here without legal status. So Trump is what he's doing is really opening people's eyes to to just like the impunity of his administration, the billionaire power grab that is behind all of this. And I'll have more to say about that, right? Like where does the business class fit into this? Because they need these workers.
Right.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
It has been really there. My mind is going in there's so many different threads to this story that is important for folk that is relevant for people to hear. And I definitely encourage people to check your writing out at LaborNotes. That story about the Louisville union members who are being rendered deportable as we speak, who came here legally, right? They came here the right way, in big scare quotes, as much as that phrase is overused. They came here the right way. And now Trump is trying to deport them. And definitely check that out, labornotes.org. And the rest of your writing, it's always really good. I want to stay on Los Angeles for another moment, because we've been seeing the pictures from Los Angeles have been going like spreading like fire online, particularly the ones where there is fire, where there are Waymos burning, and we're supposed to feel really, really sad for the robot taxis, and really sad for this, huge tech company, for some reason. But, we're being shown these pictures, and the implication there is that the whole city is like burning to the ground. There's an insurrection. Things are crazy. Like people can't get around. Is kind of the implication behind a lot of the breathless coverage. You've talked to a lot of people on the ground in Los Angeles. Is that the feeling that people have on the ground, that their city is in total turmoil and everything is falling apart, and they need the National Guard to come in and restore order?
The protests have been largely peaceful, but Trump has used a few incidents during the protests, like I said earlier, to kind of inflame the racist imagination, hearkening to tropes of hordes of Latinos waving Mexican and Central American flags and burning down Los Angeles. The Mexican flag in particular has become a potent symbol of the resistance. Kristi Noem, head of the Department of Homeland Security, accused Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum of encouraging violent protests. Sheinbaum called the charges absolutely false, But I spoke to Chris Siglioso of the Inland Boatmen's Union, the IOW's regional director of Southern California. And, he went to a rally that happened on Monday to demand David Huerta's release at Grand Park. And, what he told me was that, going from based on what people were seeing on TV, and talking to members, they were like, okay, what are we going into? But what he saw was just, thousands of union members rallying peacefully, demanding the release of David Huerta. He was released later that day, but charged with a felony, as you said, Jacob. So yeah, there have been Waymos that have been burned. Yes, that has happened. Yes, workers have thrown eggs at these, armored vans that are spiriting away their loved ones, right? But think about the asymmetry between that. Mm-hmm. We're talking about eggs, and we're talking about, the National Guard being deployed over the head of the governor, Gavin Newsom. The Marines being deployed, even over the chain of command within the military themselves are like, concerned about this. They don't want to be deployed on U.S. soil, right? Mm-hmm. So Trump has manufactured a crisis to justify clamping down on any protest to his administration's overreach in terms of how they're carrying out these deportation raids. One thing to note is that there was a Pew Center poll that said that about 80% of Americans, wanted illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants, illegal in quotes, deported. And when you dig into the poll, it turns out that, that number diminishes the more specific you get. If people have been here for a number of years, have families, are working, are contributing, the number drops down. So Trump has created this fantasy of fentanyl dealing criminals that are, destroying America. But the reality is, and we've seen this in many small rural towns across America, is that when you put a concrete person, to that trope, someone named Carol, someone named Juan, it's a neighbor, a coworker, all of that kind of falls away. So what we are seeing in terms of the Los Angeles is that people are seeing their communities, being detained and without warrants, and they are rightfully outraged. So that outrage has produced a sense of we have no way to stop this. One of the things that I have heard over and over, and you alluded to earlier, in protests in New York and, from people in Los Angeles, is they did it the right way. People are being, whisked away into these armored vehicles when they're showing up for appointments, court-mandated appointments. So if you are, quote unquote, getting in line to go to the courthouse and a masked agent shows up and arrests you, and when you ask to call your lawyer or you ask for any information, they deny you that information, it kind of sets the precedent for lawlessness. And the lawlessness that we are seeing is from the federal government.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that that's so important to note that the quote unquote support for quote unquote mass deportation, I really do think is so much more flimsy than the people on the right would want us to believe, because it is based on, like you said, a frankly racist lie that all of the people that are here, documented or undocumented, are just committing crimes. And so they have this idea of immigrants from the news, but the people that they know in their real life, to the extent they know any, are just normal people who are going to work, who are trying to provide for their family. And we're seeing Trump's approval on immigration decrease as more and more of these stories are starting to come out, and it's starting to actually affect people's communities. But I mean, you know, this is such a normal thing that people support a policy that hurts people until it hurts somebody that they know. I mean, I have a story from, gosh, I guess it was like 10 or 15 years ago, where there was I grew up in a Pentecostal type environment, almost, like 98% white, right? But there was a person who was friends with a person at this church who was undocumented. And there was a scare that her and her family were going to be deported. And this huge, like 98% white, 95% conservative, I would bet 90% of them, the ones that voted for Trump, they like sent out a text to their church asking people to pray that this undocumented person doesn't get deported, because they know her, because she's a member of the community and they love her, right? And so the more that this starts to trickle down, I think that you really are going to see support for this decrease, because I don't think it's as wide and deep as people want you to believe. And speaking of, the support kind of falling through, you mentioned the business community. The business community has been reacting in a really big way, and that's at least part of the reason that the Trump administration just today issued new guidance to stop all raids on what were the categories of places? Farms, manufacturers, and meat packing plants?
Yeah. So we know, from the last Trump administration, that in particular, the meat packing plants, were really leaned on him to stop, targeting meat packing. And this was during the context of the pandemic. These workers were rendered essential workers. That's one of the placards that I've seen in a lot of the rallies. Is like, we are essential workers. We are not criminals. So what has happened now is that Trump has been forced to back down after pressure from hotel, restaurant, and agricultural bosses, saying that not all immigrants who work in restaurants are criminals. Something that, the immigrant rights movement and many unions have been saying. They've been shouting this from the rooftops. And also, it's important to also not give them that talking point about criminals, right? What Trump has also sought to do is expand the category of who's a criminal, right? Because it puts people on the defensive. Are you going to defend a criminal? Are you going to do, and that's been part of their thinking. So they have been expanding the definition of what constitutes criminality. So in this instance, criminality apparently just means that you have brown skin.
Right.
So now he's kind of laying off in terms of some of the pressure, because agriculture is really big in California. Many of the people that work those jobs, many of them are undocumented. That's just the reality. And many of them are, H-2A visa holders as well. So what the bosses, want is to stoke fear, because it keeps workers in line, not making any trouble in terms of demanding their rights in the workplace, but they don't want them to actually be deported, right? So what Trump has kind of, the Rubicon that Trump has crossed here is that he's no longer just stoking fear of mass deportation. He and Stephen Miller are seeking to enact it in such a way where it would just destroy different communities in terms of the workers that actually power the manufacturing that you see in Louisville, the manufacturing that you see in Los Angeles. Many of the people that were detained were day laborers from a parking lot at Home Depot. Many of them were seamstresses in the LA fashion district. Many of them were retail workers. So the fact that the raids have shifted from community sweeps to workplaces is something that has alarmed the labor movement. And that's why unions are reacting in the way that they are, because the lifeblood of the labor movement is solidarity. It is the highest value statement of our movement. And solidarity isn't just a nice slogan. It must be experienced to be believed. And right now, immigrant workers are experiencing that their brothers and sisters are standing with them.
That's so great, Luis. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and I really appreciate you reporting again. I cannot recommend people go and check it out enough In These Times and LaborNotes.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.